So this is the topic. We have 5 attendees. We weren't expecting really many more than that. What do we have, Christiane? 6 registered, I think, for this thing. So if you have questions, please do type them in. Where's our question box? There we go. There's the question box. It works just fine. Thanks, Eric. So I'll just move that box over there. Great. So the discussion today is it's an introduction from John that I think everyone may know. I'll come back and you can start your formal introduction in a second, John. And Monika Ferenczy, who's an advisor on school matters. And when we do get started, one of the first things that we'll discuss is the new caregiver benefit. So John, would you like to say some kind words about me especially? And
my journey, I've helped learn to help some people apply for, and if necessary, appeal to get the disability tax credit. And one of the amazing things about what Parliament did 20 years ago is expand the eligibility. You don't actually have to be disabled to qualify for it, but the pathway they added was: are you on time-consuming therapy to prevent becoming disabled or severely impaired? And that's what the PKU treatment is all about.
I see.
And then that brought me to Ottawa a few times. And a friend of a friend said, hey, there's this guy named Kenneth Pope who's giving a talk at a community center. And it's about disability and including disability. Hey, John, maybe you'd be interested in that. And Ken, you'll remember this total stranger showed up in the audience and started asking some questions and that. And then you and we had a little chat afterwards, and we got to know each other pretty well. So, and it's amazing. And I was in a relationship with a young lady in Ottawa, and your firm was very helpful in terms of helping me and her understand what the landscape is for possible disability benefits. Hopefully she will eventually fully recover from her severe concussion and not have to pursue all of that. But so that's, and I realized that Ken Pope and Pope Law are wizards at a number of things that I'm not wizards at. And maybe for some people and some families with PKU, it would be useful. And through Ken and Pope Law, I have met Monika, and you have invited Monika to join us today. And I'm generally aware that quite a few families dealing with PKU also end up having some, shall we say, special considerations for their growing children with the formal education system. So and so hopefully we're going to try and add value to all the families and all the participants today.
That's a great intro, John. Thanks. And I knew immediately at that meeting that I was dealing with someone who's very knowledgeable and very affable, and I've enjoyed our relationship ever since. And that, by the way, thanks for help on that last appeal matter we were dealing with.
That's my first. I'm maintaining my record and counting that one. I've been involved in 18 appeals to the Tax Court of Canada of people unjustly denied the disability tax credit. This one was a couple of girls who were on the autism spectrum somewhere. And so the 18 appeals, 18 victories for the taxpayer.
That's good.
I'll put that track record up against any law firm at the Tax Court of Canada.
True. Monika, would you like to say a few words of introduction for yourself?
Thanks, Ken. Yes, it's a great pleasure for me to join you gentlemen today and offer some advice and information and lend my expertise to families who are currently navigating a very disruptive education system, and hopefully be able to provide some guidance as to what sort of interventions or strategies have worked for other families and how to obtain information and services and programs for their children including different options that may or may not be explained to parents by the school system. Not only because the administrators may not be fully cognizant of them, but also because there is such turnover right now in staff that it's really hard to determine who has the right information.
Thank you. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was something that's brand new. It's not law yet, but I think everybody reads the papers or sees things on Facebook or wherever you get your news. And the CERB benefits are being phased out, and EI is being transmogrified. And there's 3 or 4 different benefit programs now that are being put in place. But the one that is pertinent to us is a caregiver benefit. Now, this is just as of last Thursday. There's no portal that I can see to register for this stuff. But it would appear that there was some minor negotiations with the Liberals and the NDP that increased the amount per week to $500 from $400, and it would appear that this is going to result in them supporting the throne speech and not having an election. So for good or ill, that's what appears to be what it is. And the interesting thing is that it turns on this particular benefit, which is I think very interesting. And the interesting thing here is that it covers people who were working. You have to have made at least $5,000 in 2020 or 2019 to receive this benefit. So the point of that, of course, is that it doesn't apply to people, mothers, who have been at home not working all the time as caregivers. It has to be someone who was working either part-time or full-time, possibly, who now can't work full-time. So it doesn't include all the people that were originally full-time caregivers and who didn't work. And these benefits are not retroactive. They don't actually kick in. What's that, a 28th? So they're supposed to become effective on the 27th. But as far as I know, legislation hasn't been actually passed yet. But that doesn't mean they won't proceed on the basis that it will be passed. Obviously, if the throne speech was defeated, then the bill won't be passed. It won't happen. But that appears not to be what is going to happen. And it says 60% of your normal scheduled work. As of this morning, what I'm hearing is that it's less than 50% of your income. Perhaps a little easier to quantify. And it must be COVID related. It has to be either that you're home taking care of a child of any age, or with or without some special needs, who's under 12, or a person with disabilities over 12, or a person who's dependent, such as an elderly parent, for example. So it's just starting. It's not retroactive, but I have lots of clients, families where one of the parents, typically the mother, is taking care of a child, as well as a parent and often a husband. I don't know how the heck they do it a lot of times. So anyway, this is a new benefit that is available for 26 weeks. It also applies if both either the facility or the school, for example, that your child went to won't accept the child, or is closed, or the supports that were coming into your home cannot now come because of COVID for some reason. But it's got to be COVID related. And that's really about all we know. Do you two have any comments on that, or shall we just carry on with the presentation?
I don't have any comments.
Okay. So we're going to try to be done by 1 o'clock, maybe shortly after, but we try to keep these little events, short. We had a lunch hour event, a question and answer event last week, and it was more well attended than the evening events that we've had. So some people liked it at lunch, no question. Monika, would you like to carry on and just tell me when to click the slides, and I'll be happy to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So navigating the school system in the age of COVID-19, that is since March the 15th, we've had different stories of challenges of parents being able to sustain the learning at home. That was very unspecific, I would say. But we've also had some success stories, particularly with some special needs children who have very high anxiety with school. This form of learning actually turned out to be a silver lining and a blessing in disguise for those families. If the child was able to engage and high functionally enough to engage in online learning. It was, however, a challenge, and no learning occurred if the child is very high needs or the youth is very high needs and cannot engage in an online learning setting. So as we head back to school now in September, I think everyone's back at school by this date. The TDSB started online learning on September 17th, I believe. In one form or another, everyone has returned to school. And so this presents a whole new set of challenges, one of which is communication. Communication has always been a challenge with school personnel. And through the research projects that are available on my website at Horizon Educational Consulting, you can consult these reports about the barriers and obstacles that parents of special needs children have faced over the years, but the common denominator is communication. So the magic formula for that is that all communication should be in writing. So usually if a parent sends a communication, an email, they'll get a phone call back. And it's the difficulty with that is that phone call is not recorded. It can be misinterpreted. It's often said that the parent misinterprets the information provided by the school. So in order to avoid that, I always recommend that everything be sent by email, and anything that is more formal, like IPRC or IEP later, by letter, that can be attached to an email. Because emails are informal communication, letters are formal communication. It's also important, because of the high turnover of staff, to copy several individuals versus one contact. And so those individuals would include the key contact, which is usually the classroom teacher, the learning support teacher, and the principal or vice principal, at least one person from the administration. And the reason for that is that not everyone is available to read the emails, and certain individuals need access to certain information. So copying 3 individuals is a very good strategy. And so at this point in time, early childhood educators, ECEs, or educational assistants are not usually looped into the conversation. Best practice is that they are, but this has been a challenge. As I have many clients who'll say, I need to know what my child is doing every day. Can I ask for a daily summary? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, but a weekly summary, usually through the ECE who communicates it to the teacher is the point of contact. So you can request weekly updates. I always put forth that no news is usually good news, and to just maintain a weekly contact. Some school boards have made it difficult for parents if they become very demanding and have issued communication lockdown, so they're not allowed to talk to school personnel, so we don't want that situation happening. And there are 3 pieces of policy and that I've put up here for you that is fairly new. The 2017 Special Education in Ontario Kindergarten to Grade 12 Policy and Guideline tells you what the new norms of practice should be in a school. And then there's the supporting 2018 Human Rights Commission Policy, Accessible Education for Students with Disabilities, has lots of examples of how students have faced some challenges and what can be done to overcome them in the post-secondary sector as well. And then most recently, I wrote to the Minister of Education and the Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission way back in April and May, because I was receiving calls from parents saying they're not doing the IPRC this year. They're telling me that they don't have to do it. They don't want to change my child's IEP. And so this prompted this letter that you see here that was published on July 14th from the Commission that specifically speaks to respecting the rights of students with disabilities during COVID. And that means offering all the usual processes that are entitled for parents during the regular school year time. So moving on to the next slide. So basically, pandemic or no pandemic, the child's right to supports for learning don't change. However, the delivery of these supports does change. And so this is where we see the online learning coming in and the in-person support coming in. So if your child goes to school, they will receive the support of an EA, not one-to-one, but shared support with other children. There is no one-to-one support with children anymore. And so that's something that I often have to explain to parents. We can't tailor-made or custom order an EA to support our children anymore. But they are entitled to the supports and the accommodations and the modifications that the student would have during a regular school year in attending. So these school boards, even though they must train their staff for disability and accessibility awareness, there still remains a lot of lack of understanding, is how I'm going to frame it, because many explanations have to be given in order for either a teacher or a school principal to understand what constitutes a disability, if it's an invisible disability like a learning disability, or what accommodations need to be provided. So this information is provided here on this slide so that it can be referenced to school personnel if needed. On the next slide. So here is a little bit of a menu of what to do in order to advocate for your child in the school. And in the school also means online. There should always be a key contact person. So communicate with the school staff. Daily is there in terms of transitioning. So if a child is going back to school because they haven't been in school for 6 months, if they're new to online learning, it's acceptable for a short period of time to do a quick daily communication with staff. But generally, weekly or monthly is more the norm. Reviewing a child's OSR, this has not been possible because parents are not allowed into the schools currently, but you can have a copy of the OSR provided to you by requesting the principal. And the OSR is where all of the school reporting, so report cards, IEPs, any consultations from school board personnel have filed reports, and also where your assessment reports or any private professionals assessment reports are found. So in order to ensure that your child is supported, the school needs to have this information, and it needs to be updated at least once a year. As I mentioned, to document communication using email, not phone calls, for important discussions and decisions. Request a photocopy of any document that's sent home with your signature. A lot of new practices, including sending forms digitally for signature and sending them back. This has been a huge bonus because otherwise it's been sent through child backpack mail, which is not reliable. And so that's an improvement in the practice due to COVID, so that's a good thing. And then asking questions of your child and school staff is always good, and staying informed, as I've indicated, on these new documents and new pieces that come up. When you do take to virtual meetings with school staff, which is how most have been occurring, a new practice I have had with 2 school boards now is that the staff are providing minutes of these virtual meetings, which has never happened in the past, but it is a very good new practice. So very pleased to see that, but also taking personal notes. I always encourage parents not to be the only person at the meeting, always have somebody with you. And some school boards will say that you do not have the right to record a meeting. That's a virtual meeting. And so taking notes is important. And then for IPRC and IEP meetings, of course, those are important meetings. They should be well documented, well minuted, with next steps and different individuals having their roles and responsibilities to fulfill. And the next slide.
Monica, it's John here. If you don't mind, I just want to, I've looked at the list of attendees, and two of the attendees I know are from the province of Ontario. So you've been talking in the language of the province of Ontario education system. I would just point out that one of our attendees is from Quebec.
Okay.
Uh,
So for those in the Quebec system, there is generally the framework is the same for special education. Communication items I've mentioned would apply equally in any province. This slide here might be a little bit different in different provinces. So you have special system class placements and assessment requirements. So fully integrated in a regular classroom means the child goes to school in a regular classroom and has some assistance there. And then sometimes the children are semi-integrated in a regular classroom, so they are part-time in a specialized classroom, and then they're integrated. Now, online, this doesn't really occur very well. This would be for a child who's attending. And self-contained system classes, which are specialized education classes. So right now during COVID, I've been encouraging parents who don't have any health concerns to send their children if they are in specialized system classes, because they are their own cohort. There's usually only 10 children in that class, and they usually will move from place to place together. There will likely not be integration in the school right now to reduce the contact points. But once your child is in a specialized class, they're receiving specialized service, which cannot be delivered the same way online. So if there are no health concerns, this is why I recommend that they do attend, so that you can take advantage of that specialized system class placement. Many of those parents also need well-deserved respite, and so sending their children to school in the specialized classes provides them respite during the day as well. For other issues such as transportation, so we've seen what's gone on with transportation. Some kids are put in the same seats as their classmates or their family members. However, I really don't know how that's rolling out. We have large teacher shortages and school bus transportation shortages. I know many parents have just opted to drive their children to school. Allocation of support staff. So like I said, you can't custom order educational assistant support one-on-one for your child. It is always shared support. The higher the level of support is always found in the system classes, which usually have one teacher and 2 EAs or ECEs. And so if that's the level of support that the child needs, that's where they should be. However, there are wait lists for those classes. Regardless, even in a regular class, the child needs to be given support. So we often ask for emergency EA support, which is 3 weeks, that the school board must provide additional support until the school can come up with a plan on how the child is supported. And finally, assessments are not required to request an IEP, an individual education plan. So your child is entitled to support based on needs, not based on diagnosis or documentation or testing, but it is often requested and should be ongoing. Again, because of COVID, some psychologists have not returned to testing because of the physical distancing requirements. Some of it has gone virtual, but these are all changes that will evolve with COVID. And so the next slide. So prioritizing your need, your child's changing needs to available programs. So this is a little harder to do during COVID. But if your child has a static diagnosis such as autism, or an evolving diagnosis such as a 4 or 5-year-old that has speech difficulties as well as mobility, fine motor, gross motor, we're not quite sure what the final learning profile will look like for that child. So maybe sometimes it's better to start in a specialized system class and then move to an integrated classroom once we know more about the child's needs. Or the other way around, to start them in a regular class so that they're exposed to neurotypical children, especially for some high-functioning children on the spectrum. That's very a good place for them to be, so that they see the modeled support. And then their level of independence, their growth and development, your learning priorities. So are you sending your child for social integration skills, training, or for learning? Some children will learn anywhere. But if your learning priority is to send them to school to learn, but they have many other needs first, those needs will be taken care of first before the learning needs. So that's just something I highlight to parents. And learning can always be caught up if there are delays, but social integration needs, emotional and development cannot. So it's important to meet the biggest need first and then work down the list of priorities. And then transportation or location. So some parents will be offered a specialized class, but it's an 1.5 hour van ride from the home. So it really isn't worth it because the child arrives to that program already tired. And so those need to be weighed as consideration as to having the child at a local school or having them travel to a specialized school. And then also taking into consideration school personnel and professional practitioners' recommendations. I've had a number of requests this fall for parents to have their children repeat or continue in the same grade, saying that they did not have enough time to learn in kindergarten, or they didn't benefit from 2 years or 1 year, and they have developmental delays. So interestingly enough, here on the Ontario side, we have the French school boards who have no hesitation to allow a child to continue in the same grade, but the English language school boards are very against it. And so I have a number of families where we're looking into some higher level negotiations with the school boards, because ultimately the child's placement is the family and the parents' rights and not the service providers. But we don't get concrete answers for that. We don't do that. We don't hold children back. We don't retain them. And then the research that is quoted is from the 70s and 80s and does not take into consideration developmental needs and trajectories and that whole conversation. So that's been an interesting new question come up. So we've had a couple of parents seek professional recommendations from their occupational therapist, their psychologist, their pediatrician, that continuing in the same grade would be beneficial for the child. So that's an interesting new development. And then the next slide, transitioning to community programs after age 21. So if your child or youth is approaching the 16-year-old benchmark, it's time to plan for the transition after age 21. And there are more and more programs in the community colleges, Algonquin here in Ottawa, for example, that offers auditing programs and courses for young adults with developmental disabilities. So they can still access education. They may not earn a diploma, but they do get access to educational and learning opportunity, which is excellent. And then there are some other opportunities out there with inclusive employers who will offer training, and a number of specialized organizations that support parents and young adults. And so these points here just highlight a couple of things to think about as the youth approaches 16 years of age, which become a little harder to do once they age out after 21. And then I think my last slide there is what to do if a problem occurs. So really go back to the documentation. We can ask the school system to do much more when we have documents to forward to them. Referring to legislation, school board policies, and ministry documents, very important to show that the requests are within the framework of what the school board providers need to do under the duty to accommodate, to respect the human rights code for our students with disabilities. Dating correspondence, directing first expression of concern. We still have a hierarchy in the school system: teacher, learning support teacher, principal, superintendent, director of education for high level intervention, but it's usually rerouted to a superintendent. And then sometimes, which is occurring with a number of my families right now, is reaching out to legal for some support because the school board is not providing what is being requested, and it is within their ability to accommodate. And so keeping responses in an organized manner, either electronic files or paper format, filing a written complaint according to school board processes. This is usually writing a letter to the superintendent, director. And then I always encourage families to file a complaint with the Ontario Ombudsman's Office, because they are tracking in their yearly and annual reports the number of complaints from the education sector. Their interventions sometimes, unfortunately, is a little bit slow, especially now, but it's still important that they be made aware of the challenges and obstacles faced. And if there's any other problems, please contact me and I can help individual families navigate whatever challenge comes up. Happy to do that. Thanks, Ken.
That sounds like good advice to me. It's obvious from the way you've been explaining this that you know what you're doing.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give some people some perspective. Everybody thinks they're crazy and alone. They just maybe know there are a few other people that are also crazy and alone. But in Ontario, the short story is that approximately 1 family in 10 is a household that has a child with special needs. And I won't go through these numbers right now, but you can take my word for it. And if you start to bring in the siblings of the child with special needs, who later in life perhaps would be the trustee of their Henson trust or their legal guardian when their parents are gone, you're looking at 1 in 5, obviously, at least. And that's if it's just one sibling. This is the breakdown. These are all Ontario statistics, but these are all provided by their statisticians, by ODSP, provincial disability benefit statisticians. Where would PKU fall into this? Would it be under developmental?
Depending on the nature of the diagnosis and the time of the diagnosis, yeah, it would be under. It's generally developmental are the issues.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Although I have to say that it's not unheard of. There's a disproportionate representation among PKU people with anxiety, depression, and attention disorders.
I see. So a double diagnosis of some sort.
Yeah, well.
And these are just some interesting numbers here. This will show you that in each municipal area, these are the numbers of people on ODSP between ages of 18 and 65. These are the numbers in that particular municipal area. For example, I'll just scroll down to Ottawa. It's here someplace. There we go. So there's Ottawa. Now Ottawa has a population of about 1 million right now. The sign on the highway leading into town says 1 million population. And what StatsCan says is that if you divide a number by 3, you get the number of households. So if we had 999,000 households, you'd have 333,000 population. Sorry, you'd have 333,000 households. So 10% of that would be 33,000. And you can see here that between ages 18 and 65 in Ottawa, there's 25,000. They also have a lot of other people within those benefit units. And this is a much lesser number, but this is assistance for children with severe disabilities. If you happen to have a low household income, such as a single mother, single father, income below 45,000, which isn't that hard to do, then it's possible that the child would qualify before they're 18 for this assistance for children with severe disabilities. And what it's like is the provincial disability benefits for minors, where the household, it doesn't really have to do with the severity of the disability, just a low income household. Each province has benefits similar to this. Upon reaching age 18, there are certain financial supports that are provided, plus drug and dental and transportation services and potentially supported living and all of those things. So if your child's over 18 and receiving provincial disability benefits financially, then they also get drug and dental. They're on a list for housing, they get transportation supports, assistive devices, that kind of thing. The 2 most common tax credits that people should know about and may or may not be using are the disability and caregiver tax credits. And if you have a child who's under 18, which is sort of the topic today, then the disability credit, if they are markedly restricted or require constant supervision or can't set and keep goals or are restricted in some other way, well, then they would qualify for the disability tax credit. And what it would do is if a parent pays income tax, it would save them about $2,200 a year. And as well, there would be a supplementary child disability amount. You know, people get a child benefit. Well, there's a child disability benefit as well, which is a maximum of about $2,400 a year. And if it turns out that your child, you know, you've been kind of busy for the last 7 or 8 years, and now it comes to your attention that there is this disability credit and the child disability benefit and so on, that's not uncommon. I find a lot of times I get the call when the kid is 7, because they're in school, they have programs, they've been through all the hoops, they finally got the diagnosis, and all of a sudden the parents have the time to take a breath and think about the future a bit more. So this is where we would put these in, and retroactively you can claim back for 10 years. You then potentially receive $22,000 for the disability credit, and up to $24,000 for the child disability benefit. We've done that before. I remember a couple in Maple, Ontario, who had 2 children with autism, and never used the credits, and they couldn't use the tax credits because they didn't pay taxes. The husband had been injured at work and was receiving workman's comp, which is not taxable. But we were able to transfer the credits to the mother's mother, the young grandmother, who was employed, and we recaptured about $44,000 for her, and plus credits going forward. And in that case, the full child benefit of about $24,000 per child, which was very gratifying. You could set up an RDSP if the child's under 18, but my advice is to just set it up, get on the mailing list, wait till the child's 18, and then based upon the child's own income, if you contribute $1,500, the government will contribute $4,500 for up to 10 years. And that's all on that slide. The criteria for provincial benefits in Ontario and most provinces is 3 levels. One is you can't function in a competitive workplace. One is you can't function in the community. And then thirdly is can't handle personal care. So you can see that there are asset tests and income tests, but of course 18-year-old kids with special needs don't have assets or income. This just deals with getting approved for the disability credit. Oops. Sorry. And it can be difficult, but there is a procedure. If you need assistance to seek this, let us know. The caregiver credit doesn't come in until the child's 18. But when it does, and the child's 18, then the parent, the caregiver, can use it. And what it does is it reduces their taxes by $1,000 a year. And if the child was 28 and this just came to your attention, which is common, then you could recapture up to $8,000 over the last 10 years. The DTC, disability tax credit, means that you can have an RDSP. You can't have an RDSP to contribute $1,500 and get $4,500 unless you are approved for that credit. And as you can see in a little more detail here, the advantage is that it's a long-term savings plan. It's property that belongs to the child. It's not like an RESP that belongs to the parent, and it's not like an RRSP in the sense that if you contribute money, you get a tax reduction. It's none of those. But still, if you put in $1,500 and get $4,500, that's a pretty good deal. And over time, it takes 30 years, maximum 30 years, to have everything invested, locked in, and able to be accessed. So it's really more like a retirement plan, but still a very good thing. If the child is 18 and competent, then they're an adult, and you should have their power of attorney for property and personal care. You won't have to worry too much about property at this point, although the RDSP will become several $100,000 in due course. But it does allow you to have some legitimacy and also something to wave under the nose of doctors and hospitals if medical treatment is needed. Otherwise, it's true, you would, if the child is not competent, you would be the substitute decision maker. But we find that it doesn't really get much weight. The doctors in hospitals tend to think they know best about your child, and of course they don't, you do. My clients all have a big file, a big box, a lot of times, with folders and copies of all the tests the child's ever had, and the doctors they've ever seen, and the medications they've ever received. And you know, my client parent families, they are the experts. They're just constantly updating and providing continuity and security, and advising the doctors meeting this child for the first time. And that's a big hurdle at age 18, because the child becomes an adult, they no longer see a pediatrician, they don't go to CHIO anymore. You know, it's just one more hoop to go through. If they can sign powers of attorney for personal care and property, well, then of course this is the simplest and the least expensive, and they should be put in place whenever you can. And a substitute decision maker is someone that is in a hierarchy, allowed to be a substitute decision maker if a person is not capable. And of course, in most cases, as you'd expect, would be the parents first, and then perhaps siblings, and so on. If necessary, when the child's 18, or just prior to 18, but you don't do the assessments until the child is 18. You could be appointed by the court to be the legal guardian. So, for example, there are a lot of programs where someone has to be the legal representative, legal guardian, and the party, the child, can't sign a power of attorney. So, for example, there are family managed funding plans. It's a fairly new program, but I'm told there's about 115 or 151 families in this category now. Its program's only a couple of years old, but it's where there's independent funding for things that was always the type of thing that was available before for individuals who might have, for example, physical disabilities, and they would be given funding to basically become an employer, to hire people to come in and change their light bulbs, and help them bathing, and help them cooking, and so on. And they had to keep track of it, and they had to, you know, withhold and remit, and so on. Well, it turns out that this new program, if the child is or becomes 18, well, then someone has to be their legal guardian to handle the money that is family managed. So we're now in the process of doing guardianships for this particular type of family. This is a small matter. If you, in all the provinces, if you are a pensioner who has a provincial statutory pension, such as teachers, municipal employees, power generators, workmen's compensation, you potentially can leave 50% of your starting pension. You know, usually it's like 2/3 to your spouse, and then you die, the spouse dies, and 50% of the original pension is left for the adult dependent survivor child. And it's a very little known fact that this is potentially available. You can see that if you're a teacher and you have a $60,000 pension, that your child could stand to have a $30,000 pension, which is better, for example, in Ontario, than the maximum ODSP, which is $14,000. But of course, to apply for it, someone has to be their legal representative. Either they have to have capacity to sign powers of attorney, or you have to be a legal guardian to apply for this and to receive it. And then I think almost finally here, I hope, this is the basic wording that is needed in a will with the Henson Trust, so that an inheritance, a trust fund left by the parents, left by the family, does not stand as an asset of the child, which would then disqualify them from provincial benefits. And also, by the way, the child might well not be able to manage this money. So you need a trustee to manage it. and to see that provincial benefits aren't lost. And
Ken,
yeah.
may I just, sorry, one
go ahead.
Just on that theme. A child who has the DTC, but otherwise doesn't qualify or doesn't need any of the other disability support programs,
yep.
In that kind of standalone situation, would a Henson trust be applicable?
Well, as I say, there's two factors. Obviously, if a person qualifies for the disability tax credit, if it's purely physical and they're working, could be, right? Then no. But the trust arrangement is suitable if it is best to have someone as a trustee for that person, or if it would affect provincial benefits or other benefits. It's an interesting discussion. One factor, for example, is if you have a child who is approved for the disability credit and they're not on provincial disability benefits and they are capable, well, obviously there's still going to be some PKU related effect, presuming this is PKU related. But the interesting fact is that if the money is left in the form of a Henson trust, if they happen to marry and divorce, which I think anecdotally could happen more often for people with disabilities or who are approved for the disability credit, then this inheritance is protected from any kind of matrimonial division, which is a useful function. There's no discussing, a prenuptial agreement or whatever. It's just not an issue. I remember sitting at the conference table one time with a mother and her mother, the grandmother, and we're discussing the situation. The mother has several children. One of them has special needs. So we're talking about wills and Henson trusts and so on. And part of that discussion, once you look at the parent, the mother's household family situation, she and her husband, you also look up the line to the grandmother who happened to be there. And well, what you do is the optimum situation is that the grandmother, instead of just leaving an inheritance directly to her daughter, which will then be invested and the income taxed, and then the money used on the children, what you do is you set up a Henson trust in the grandmother's will to receive her daughter's share. So for example, a half or a third of the estate. So instead of giving it to the daughter directly, what you do is you have a trust, a Henson trust. And the daughter is her own trustee for her inheritance. And she's a beneficiary along with the 3 children, one of whom has special needs. And so she can tap into this trust. There's no restriction at all because she's a beneficiary. But what she would do is she would take capital as she might see fit, but the income portion would be attributed to the children and especially to the child with special needs because they have more tax credits. And sort of at the end of the discussion, you try not to be too blunt, but you point out that as well, that if this inheritance goes into this Henson trust that grandma is setting up, and if her daughter and her husband happen to divorce, this money is not divisible with the divorcing husband. And the two of them sort of stop a minute and their eyes open, and then they look at each other, and then grandma says, "Yeah, we want one of those." And it's just the light goes on, because you know darn well that when that youngest child goes off to university, there's going to be a divorce. So, this is a rather arcane bit here. I don't think I'll go into this. I'll just say that if there's a trust in a will which owns a home for a child with special needs, it does qualify as a principal residence for capital gains exemption, but it is not a matrimonial home if the child happens to marry because it's owned by the trust. And as far as passport funding, for over 18, there's passport funding for kids with cognitive disabilities. If you're involved with Developmental Services Ontario, they will help with that passport application. A common amount of money is $5,000, although I've seen 30 to 60,000 a year. And under 18, it's called Special Services at Home. Very similar, but not just for cognitively impaired. And anyone who is presently receiving these funds, a couple of months ago, will have received a bulletin that the kinds of things you can spend money on and be reimbursed for during COVID were expanded to deal with anything that had to do with remote access to schools and remote training and remote support and remote medical and those sorts of things. Let's see what else we've got here. And that's about it. We're doing well here. It's 5 to 1. These are the contact details for myself and Monika. And John, what's the simplest way for people to contact you?
They usually know me, but it's john.adams@canpku.org.
Great.
I think the three people are participating in this. They know how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
I don't see any questions.
No, I don't either. If there are questions, we still have 5 or 6 minutes if anyone wants to. You can go to the question and answer box and ask a question, and we'll be very happy to do our best to answer.
Ken, I actually had a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead.
One is about RDSP. You offered the opinion that you set up the RDSP as soon as a child qualifies for the DTC, but you might want to consider postponing contributions and getting the government grants and bonds once they turn 18. I'm not following the logic of waiting until they're 18.
Well, what happens is until they're 18, the grants and bonds are dictated by the household income of the parents. So if the household income is greater than 28,000, then you don't get the $1,000 annual bond. So that's that.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's greater than about 95,000, then if you put in 1,000, you get 1,000. It's not too bad below the 95,000. If you put in 1,500, you get 3,500. But basically, by the time the child is 18, and it's based on their income, well, then you get the maximum, biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, for the next 20 years, and you're not out anything. And my experience is, for example, I was talking to a family the other day, and the child was 9, and they didn't have an RDSP. We will set one up so that they're on the mailing list, and any changes they'll be advised. But the best that would happen in that scenario with the two parents' income is 1,000 and 1,000 for 9 years. Well, okay. But my experience, and once I explained the rationale, they agreed, because they had, how many kids did they have? I think 5 children. And in my day, that was common, right? But less common now. But there's always a place for $1,000 in my experience. If you have young kids, there's always a place for that $1,000. But by the time the child's 18, they start to receive provincial benefits. And all of a sudden there's, let's say $1,000 a month coming into the household. Well, all of a sudden you can afford $1,500 a year. That's the rationale. Let's use a couple of questions. Actually, John may be asking the question now. Our children are 8 and 11, and I'm wondering about waiting. Yeah, wait. That's easy. Is there a federal program that would apply to Quebec residents? I'm not aware of any federal program that applies to any residents of any province. If you find some, let me know. But there are provincial programs that do. Let's see. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome, Laura. But you can see that an RDSP is a great idea. It was brought in Mr. Flaherty brought it in the last conservative administration. And he's gone now, he's left us. But his family had a child with special needs, as far as I recall. And this is a really good example of something being done by someone who actually has personal experience, skin in the game, understanding. We see various things that happen that are just unwittingly adverse to my clients' situations or needs. And the largest reason is that it's legislation or regulations or policies that are being passed by people who have no experience with special needs. You know, they don't have a brother with special needs. You know, they don't have children with special needs. And you can't blame people for that, but we then have to try to get things corrected, which sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. So that's 1 o'clock. Any other questions, John? Or
I just want to make a quick comment about the Flaherty case. It was ironic and tragic. His child was perfectly normal until there was a very adverse reaction to a bee sting. And that rendered that child significantly disabled. I mean, it's just a fluke, all right? But and so all of Canadian families now have access in the subject to the eligibility criteria to the registered disability savings plan, because I mean, the thing, as I understand it, the philosophy of the thinking is that in most cases, probably a person with a qualifying for the DTC may not make over their lifetime as much as they would have made if they didn't qualify for the DTC. And this is a way of society and the family supplementing their income in later years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one small example of this overlooking of things. I had a Zoom meeting with a woman from Humber College recently, and we talked about the new provisions and the caregiver benefit and so on. And what became clear was that it doesn't apply to all the people who were always at home with their child, who can't now go to school or who can't bring in support. Right? You have to have worked and made 5,000, which, you know, sounds minimal, right? But clearly it's a program that does not catch all those moms who never did work because the child was born with special needs and she just never could go back to work. Now you can discuss it back and forth, of course, as to where you draw the line, but I think that's a good example of what happens.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to Monika. Monika, I feel badly. We didn't get any questions for you on the education.
She said everything. She said everything so in such an erudite way.
Yeah, absolutely. And
right?
We know how to get a hold of you. Families do when situations arise. And Ken, and to your staff, thank you for organizing this. And if you can't resist it, we're doing this one more time on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's this week, I think. Eh?
In 2 days.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, now we've had our dry run. How's that? We'll do even better next time.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it off on my end.
All right.
And I enjoyed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good day.
Take care, guys.